welcome back to the Our Moment podcast. I'm your host, Exquisite Williams, and it's nice to see you guys this week. Honestly, y'all, it has been kind of a long week, and I've just been thinking about our podcast and kind of restructuring it just a little bit. And I wouldn't say entirely restructuring, but I will say that part 4, one, not only is it my favorite part of the book, but part 4 is interesting because I fear giving too much away in a sense. So what I think is this episode will be the only episode before the part 4 breakdown, right? So I'm going to talk about this episode and just talk about our topic like we typically do, but there won't be 2. There'll be just this one. And then next week you'll get the part 4 breakdown. And then right after that, you are going to get the wrap up of the book and season 1 of Our Moment. I can't believe that it is coming to an end. I hope you've all enjoyed me. Maybe I'll cry during the wrap up, but probably not. Y'all know I'm very strong. I don't cry. Like, who's crying? But so part 4 is called Splinter. And take of that what you will, ominously. Once again, I'm not really going to get into spoilers here. You will get all of that next episode when we have our part 4 breakdown. But what I really want to talk about is kind of inheritance. I feel like I haven't really touched on this, and I think it's a big part of this book. Like, it's literally called Legendborn because the children are, they inherit their knights and stuff, so they become the Legendborn. And then we have our once born who don't have that same inheritance. But I kind of really wanted to talk on inheritance. So I'm just going to start with like the basic definition of inheritance. So inheritance refers to the assets that an individual bequeaths to their loved ones after they pass away. An inheritance may contain cash, investments, such as stocks or bonds, and other assets such as jewelry, automobiles, art, antiques, and real estate. So an inheritance is a financial term describing the assets passed down to individuals after someone dies. Most inheritance consists of cashes. Why did I make that plural? Anyway, most inheritance consists of cash that's parked in a bank account, but may contain stocks, bonds, cars, jewelry, automobile, art, antiques, real estate, and other tangible assets. Those who receive an inheritance may be subject to inheritance taxes, where the more distantly related a beneficiary is to the descendant, the larger inheritance tax is likely to be. There are currently 6 U.S. states that impose inheritance taxes, and descendants' assets are, oh my gosh, can I pronounce words today? Anyway, a descendant's assets are divided according to their will through the probate process. If there is no will, then the court will appoint an administrator to divide assets according to state laws. I think I went through that, and I think we all kind of like know what an inheritance is to some degree. Like, we've all seen shows. If you watch Succession, sometimes it's a lot going on. If you is Team Kindle out there? Can I hear an applause? As of recording this, I've seen the 3rd episode of season 3, and boy, is there a lot going on in this episode. Anyway, this is not a Succession podcast. Go find them everywhere podcasts are listened to, not a sponsor. Or if you've seen Knives Out, when the dad dies and in his will he leaves all his money and his inheritance to Marta and not his family, that causes a whole problem. So we all know of inheritances, right? And then we know, I think it's important to kind of like consider that for people of color, especially Black people in America, inheritance look kind of different, especially for those of us who come from enslaved peoples, So James Baldwin had said, like, of inheritance of things that are passed down and legacies of Black people. James Baldwin has this quote that I really like that says, "People are trapped in history and history is trapped in them." And to me, that's kind of him like being like, the legacies that we all have to live with we are trapped with them and we're kind of stuck with them. It's all like a connected thing, which, yeah, James Baldwin's a genius. Listen to him. And if there are any James Baldwin scholars that are listening to me and you think I'm wrong, DM me on my Twitter account or Instagram. But like when I start thinking about particularly about Black people inheritance, I think of one of my favorite books of all time. And I say every book is my favorite book of all time, but like one of my actual, like, really am influenced by, I think about a lot. It's called Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. It's actually funny. Alice Walker, who wrote The Color Purple, actually is the person who bound Zora Neale Hurston's book and was like, oh my gosh, this needs to get published because it had been buried for a while. But anyway, in Their Eyes Were Watching God, there is this quotation that has really stuck with me. Like, it follows me around. Like, y'all, this quote actively haunts me a little bit. And it says, "You know, honey, us color folks is branches without roots, and that makes things come round in queer ways. You in particular. I was born back due in slavery, so it wasn't for me to fulfill my dreams of what a woman ought to be and to do. That's one of the holdbacks of slavery. But nothing can't stop you from wishing. You can't beat nobody down so low till you can rob them of they will." And that quote, I feel like, speaks to a lot of, like, one, my own researches and kind of like grief and dealing with this and that and kind of like passing downs of things, right? But for Black people, the branches without roots line is like one of the heinous things about slavery. And I think I've mentioned this in an earlier podcast episode, but one of the most heinous things was the act of taking away enslaved people's heritage and roots. So now the question is, what do we pass down? What is inherited from us if we can't trace back that line, right? And I know you're all like, Exquisite, what does this got to do with Legendborn? It has everything to do with Legendborn, and I will get there. But it's like, okay, so if Black people are branches without roots, then you may be asking me, like, okay, where do we go from here? We do have to start our own roots. And when you're surrounded by a bunch of giant trees, you're kind of like having to play catch up, like, in order to like begin family legacies and inheritances that we know are passed down, right? So then I'm kind of like, so now I'm leaving away from, I'll come back to the branches without roots things. And I'm kind of going into like matrilineal things because we know that, I'm getting back to Legendborn. In Bree's family, root, which is ether, but what the root crafters call ether, the element, rootcraft is passed now matrilineally. So matrilineal societies, because I feel like we need to go back, are groups that adhere to a kinship system in which ancestral descent is traced through maternal instead of paternal lines. For our audience and y'all who are reading the book along with me, and for Legendborn, we know that the root is passed down typically from mother to daughter or grandmother to granddaughter. So we know this about the root, right? So it's kind of passed down like this through this matrilineal like flow from whenever it began, from the beginning of whenever, right? So this is in the direct opposite of the way the order flows. We know the order is very patrilineal. We know that that they get their inheritances they get their knights from all the way to the top father side. Like, it's the Knights of the Round Table. They were not female knights. They didn't want female knights. And for a long time, the order made sure that it was only knights by, I keep saying a lot. I'm sorry, y'all. The order made sure that it was only female knights, male knights, by, like, killing off the women. So like by killing off the women so that only the men would get the power, right? So this is important. This is important for us to like sit with. So we have on one side of the ether of the world that Bree is connected to and should have been connected to is all maternal. And then the other side, we have paternals going on, right? Like all the Legendborn people that she's getting involved with, they all do things paternally. So it's like, yeah, there's going to be some conflict there probably. And we do end up seeing this conflict of maternal and paternal lines kind of come to a head in part 4. A lot of things come to a head in part 4. A lot of things come to a head in part 4, which you will hear about in the next episode. We will not be, I'm not going to be holding back on that, But Bree's heritage is extremely messy, and we know that she doesn't actually know a lot about that. Like, we get, us colored folks are branches without roots. Zora Neale Hurston, have you seen Bree? Poor Bree she's a twig. Like, as I told in part 3 when she met with Mariah, and Mariah was all like, whoa, I've never seen someone so acquainted with death. Let's reach back to your grandmother and stuff. She's like, there's all these wells of life, and they're all cut off from each other. So, like, in the stream of matrilineal, like, inheritance and heritage and all of that, in the stream of it, they are like separate wells because there was never really a chance to get it passed down. So for Bree, she never met her grandmother. Her mom never met her grandmother. Her grandmother never met her grandmother. Her great-grandmother, all the way back 8 or so generations, because that is what Tracy gave us, 8 or so generations. So you can imagine kind of how traumatic that is. Like, Brianna has a lot of trauma to deal with that, and she has got to unpack it. She's got intergenerational trauma. She's got the basic trauma that almost all Black people have when we realize that we have to wrestle with the fact, if you're African American Black, if you're Black American, we had to wrestle with the fact that we are descendants of enslaved people and what that means. And I always bring it up. I'm like, when we go places, especially when we go places in the South of the United States, it's like, oh, this is an old building. This is a battlefield where people died just so I would not walk on this battlefield because they don't want me over here. These clothes, had the Civil War not happened, probably would have been ended up made by me. Like, it's those battles, right? So we had to unpack that. She's got racial trauma she's got to deal with. People are racist to her, like, all the time in this book, and it happens quite a lot. She's got like all these different things that she has to conquer, and on top of the fact that she doesn't know her family. Like, we don't get much about her dad, so I don't know what's going on her dad's side, but we do know it's really focused in on the mom. So she doesn't know her family inheritance. Once again, things that were passed down that could have been given to her heritage, or and on where she gets her magic from. And on a different note, this affects us in the real world too. So it's like, for people who can't trace back that far, like, don't know, it can affect us in the sense of, okay, I don't know if there was a family history of like sickness. I don't know what I'm at risk for. Or I don't know, is it in my family that we're writers? Is it in my family that we're creatives? Do we use our hands? Are we a carpenter family? And it's like, and for some people, they will never get a chance to know. Others can do some research. The other day, my sister did a 23andMe, and I thought it was kind of cool because they would be like, oh, this is where your DNA comes from, based on people we know for a fact their DNA comes from there. So we can kind of put them together. I don't actually understand how 23andMe works, and it low-key kind of stresses me out because I find spit to be disgusting, and so I don't want to spit into a cup. This is an unnecessary digression. But it's like, a lot of Black people have to use things like 23andMe instead of being able to go to a big family like Bible or Wall of Ages and get those notes. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? This is like, that's like, and every time I think of slavery and I think about it and I think of all the terrible things that happened and how we're still dealing with it because slavery was not that far away, that's one of the things that I'm like, dang, bro, this was evil. Like, this was evil. And that brings me back to that James Baldwin quote. People are trapped in history and history is trapped in them. It does sometimes feel like we're stuck in this not knowing, never will know what do we do? Where do we go? Where do we go? Like, just asking yourself, where do we go? Yeah. But, and from this trauma that Bree experiences, Tracy Dion tells us herself in the afterword, but also Bree gets diagnosis by her therapist, but she says that Bree is suffering from acute traumatic grief, PTSD, and persistent complex bereavement disorder caused by the loss of her mother. And Legendborn in of itself is a book that is about Black motherhood and Black daughterhood and loss and dealing with loss and finding love and like moving forward from loss and within that loss. So it's kind of like, okay, Bree, you've got to learn how to be able to move on and how to dissect what happened to you and go forward. And I think one of the reasons Bree is so stuck in like her own history, like James Baldwin said, is because she doesn't know it. She is at a loss. And Bree mentions when she's with Mariah in the last part and she's watching Mariah, she feels insane, like intense jealousy because Mariah was taught what she can do by her mother. I'm sorry, I'm a little pig. Oink oink. I just snorted. Mariah was taught what she could do by her mother, and Bree wasn't. Her mom kept it from her. Her mom hid it from her, and she feels this insane, intense loss. And it's like, yeah, I can imagine if my mom, like, I was just talking to my mom yesterday, and yesterday from when I recorded this, not yesterday from when you're hearing this. And we were talking about how she was just telling me, she was like, my mom is a crafter. She's a big craft person. And I get my creativity from my mother, but we're not into craft. And she does try to, I know, she like tries to share that with us. And she was telling me, she was like, it kind of hurts my feelings sometimes when you guys aren't as interested in crafting as I am. But sorry, Mom, I'm sorry. But it's like, if my mom had never shared that with me, like just the fact that she enjoys crafting and that wasn't something I know, I feel like I'd be jealous of people who like know their mom's interests and know that they get that from their mom and that's something they can share with their mom. I share all my stories with my mom, like when I write things. Anyway, enough of me and my mother. We're talking about Bree and her mother. We're not talking about you, Exquisite. Anyway, no, yeah. So we got our Bree, and she's like wrestling with her own inheritance things. And I just think this whole book not only is about motherhood, but once again, it's about inheritance. And it's about knowing who you are and knowing who your people are in order to move forward, including reckoning with the bad things that they have done. There's this really intense and I think really beautiful moment. It happens early in the book, and it specifically, I think, has relevance to part 4, where Bree's like, she's the scion of her family. She's the not the chosen one, but she's the one that will bring her family forward and like stand for her family, the Matthews family, because that's what they have and that's who they are. And though the other people in the room think that she's nothing, she's a scion of her family, and she's gonna do what she needs to do for her family. But there's a point where Bree is like, my family and my heritage is kind of, it comes from violence, and I have to be able to understand that and move forward at the same time. Yeah, it's like that. It's a lot to deal with. It's a lot to deal with, especially for a 16-year-old. And I feel like we need to remember, Bree is only 16. She's 16 and she just lost her mom, and some of the choices she makes reflects that she's 16, she just lost her mom, she has PTSD, my girl is passing out all the time, and she's trying to understand her place in this world where she has, quote unquote, no inheritance that she knows of. She does not have a legacy. She's a once-born. She's not a legendborn that she knows of. She's got to be the head of her family. She comes from a generation where there should be a stream of maternal and matrilineal love that's constantly being cut off because she comes from a series of women whose mothers died while they as a child were young. So she has to deal with all this, and my girl's having a hard time. And you know what? In part 4, everything is reckoned with. And that's why I only wanted to have this one part before we actually do a part 4 breakdown. I didn't want to record 2 episodes because I feel like this is important to know. Read part 4 after reading this when you just think on inheritance. Think on your own family inheritance. Think on like things that were passed down to you, maybe from your mom, maybe from your dad. You like things that like, do you think you inherit like your own creativity or your own like intelligence or your own anger, any of that? Do you inherit that from your people? Is that something that's uniquely you? Are we not just a continuation of our family line? That's a thought that I think can be had. Like, do you as a person reflect not only your ancestors, but like your ancestors' hopes and dreams? Like, there's this one idea that's like, oh, I'm my ancestors' wildest dreams. And it's like, do you agree with this? Like, my ancestors couldn't be here, but they fought so I would be here. Like, there had to be thousands of people in my line in order for me to exist today. Way more than I could ever know or fathom. And some that I'll never, ever get a chance to know because of, slavery. And because that legacy and that being able to track my own family inheritances was taken away from me very violently through that. So just think on that before you even go into part 4. Sit with that. Think about that. We know Bree has found out that her mother's death was just an accident. So she's got all this anger on her surrounding the circumstances of her mother's death. And as far as she knows, it was an accident. Like, the Merlins did not kill her. Her plan that she thinks was futile. Like, all this, like, integrating the order, it was all like, pointless. At least to her as we know in the end of part 3. And she also knows her 2 friends, quote unquote. Selwyn is her friend. That's debatable. They both also have mommy issues, but their mommy issues are different, and her experiences are different. And once again, she's got to grapple with her legacy, and we will see a lot of legacy grappling, legend once borning in Legendborn as we get into part 4, which we will do next week. It is getting cold. I hope you are all bundled up by a fire, reading this, wrapped in your comfiest blankets as we continue on into the final part of Legendborn, part 4. And then the episode that's going to come after that, I think will just be a wrap-up of the entire book. It'll be just my final thoughts and my final, like, things I need to say about Legendborn in its entirety. Because you guys all know I have a lot to say about this book. I really do love it. It is my favorite book of 2021. I think I'm going to carry this book in my heart for a while. I'm very excited for the sequel. But, and I may talk about the sequel on the podcast. Who knows if I'm even still doing a podcast while it's still going on. I might be. This podcast may evolve and take different formats than what I'm doing with it right now. But, yes, we will get into that. And I'll save being sappy about the book for the episode after next. But once again, you know the drill. If you are listening to this on YouTube, please like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you so much for listening to me. If you're listening to me anywhere else, you may have heard an ad at the beginning of this episode. Please listen to that, because that really, it greatly helps the podcast. And it'll help me grow as I'm learning. And help me show my appreciation for all of y'all. And I just really appreciate you listening. You can follow me at Exquisite Williams on Instagram, Exquisite Williams on YouTube, and I am at Exquisite WILL on Twitter. It's the most wonderful time of year. Hello, I'm playing Mariah Carey. You can't hear it because copyright claims. But yes, Merry Christmas. And Happy New Year. No, it's the beginning of December when you guys are hearing this. When I'm recording it, it's in November. But it's the beginning of December when y'all are hearing this. Or the second week of December. And yes, I will see you all next week. You can follow the podcast at Our Moment Pod. And let me know your thoughts as on your thoughts on inheritance and your thoughts on all of that as we head into part 4. Splinter. Dun dun dun. Have a very, very good day. I will talk to you all later. Bye.